The snow fell in thick, relentless sheets that Christmas Eve, turning the highway into a treacherous ribbon of ice and fear. Sarah Martinez gripped the steering wheel of her ancient Honda Civic, fighting back tears as the engine sputtered one final time before dying completely. She coasted to the shoulder, her heart sinking faster than the temperature outside. In the backseat, her 6-year-old daughter Emma clutched a stuffed reindeer, eyes wide with worry. They were still 40 miles from the children's hospital where Emma's younger brother lay recovering from emergency surgery. Sarah had promised him they'd be there before he woke up. Now, stranded on a deserted road with $17 in her bank account and a phone battery at 3%, that promise seemed impossible to keep. Sarah had been running on fumes for months, ever since her husband deployed overseas and her part-time job barely covered the mounting medical bills. The car had been making strange noises for weeks, but there was never enough money to fix it, never enough time to stop. Just keep moving forward, she'd told herself. One more day, one more mile. But the universe had finally called her bluff, and she sat there in the growing darkness, wondering how she'd become the kind of mother who couldn't even get her children through a single holiday intact. That's when the tow truck appeared through the snow like something out of a dream. It pulled up behind her, hazard lights cutting through the white curtain of winter. A man climbed out, bundled in a worn Carhartt jacket, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He knocked gently on her window, and when Sarah rolled it down, she saw a face weathered by hard work but softened by genuine concern. "Looks like you could use some help," he said simply. His name was Marcus Webb, and he'd been heading home after closing his small repair shop early for the holiday when he spotted her stranded vehicle. Sarah explained her situation in broken sentences, trying to keep her voice steady for Emma's sake. She mentioned the hospital, her son, the impossible distance still ahead. She didn't mention the empty bank account. Some humiliations were too raw to speak aloud. Marcus listened without interruption, then nodded slowly. "Pop your hood," he said. "Let me take a look." He spent 20 minutes in the freezing cold, his hands working methodically despite the wind that seemed determined to cut through everything. Finally, he straightened up, shaking his head. "Your alternator's shot, and looks like you've got some other issues too. This isn't something I can fix on the roadside." Sarah felt the last thread of hope snap. She'd call her sister, maybe, though she lived 3 hours in the opposite direction. They'd miss tonight. Her son would wake up alone, wondering why his mother had broken yet another promise. "Thank you for trying," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not done," Marcus said, surprise flickering across his features. "I'm saying we need to get this to my shop. It's about 10 minutes back. I'll tow you there, fix it up proper." Sarah started to explain about money, about how she couldn't possibly afford, but he held up a grease-stained hand. "It's Christmas Eve," he said, as if that explained everything. Nobody should be stranded on Christmas Eve. His shop was a modest affair, a converted garage with a hand-painted sign that read, "Webb's Auto Repair, honest work, fair prices." Inside, it smelled like motor oil and coffee, and a small plastic Christmas tree blinked colored lights in the corner. Marcus went to work immediately, and Sarah watched in stunned silence as this stranger dissected her car's problems with the focus of a surgeon. Emma fell asleep on a worn couch in the waiting area, her reindeer tucked under her chin. "You really don't have to do this," Sarah said for the third time. Marcus glanced up from beneath the hood, wiping his hands on a rag. "My daughter died 7 years ago," he said quietly, and the words hung in the warm air of the shop. "Car accident, day after Christmas. She was 8. He returned his attention to the engine, his movements never faltering. "Every year since, I try to help someone on the holidays. Figure if I can keep one family together, keep one kid safe, maybe that means something." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying. She thought about loss and grief, about the different ways people carry their pain. Some people let tragedy make them bitter, closed off, suspicious of the world's intentions. Others, like Marcus, transformed their suffering into something resembling grace. He could have spent this evening alone, drowning in memories and what-ifs. Instead, he'd chosen to be here, in a cold garage, fixing a stranger's car for free. 3 hours later, the Honda purred to life with a healthy rumble it hadn't managed in months. Marcus had replaced the alternator, fixed a loose battery cable, changed the oil, and addressed half a dozen other small problems Sarah hadn't even known existed. When she asked what she owed, he shook his head firmly. "Consider it paid forward," he said. "Someday, when you're in a position to help someone else, you do it. That's the deal." Sarah wanted to argue, to insist, to somehow make this transaction feel less like charity and more like a fair exchange between equals. But Emma was stirring, and her son was waiting, and sometimes grace means accepting what you can't repay. She hugged Marcus tightly, this stranger who'd become something like a guardian angel, and promised she wouldn't forget. They made it to the hospital by 11 o'clock. Her son was still sleeping, but he woke briefly when they arrived, his small face breaking into a smile that made every terrifying moment of the evening worthwhile. Sarah held both her children close and thought about Marcus alone in his shop, about the daughter he'd lost and the family he'd saved tonight. 6 months later, Sarah got a promotion at work. The pay increase wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to start breathing again, enough to build a small cushion against disaster. She remembered her promise to Marcus and started looking for opportunities to pay it forward. She donated to the children's hospital. She bought groceries for the single mother struggling in line behind her at the store. She volunteered at a women's shelter, helping other families navigate the impossible mathematics of poverty. But the real change came one summer afternoon when she drove past Webb's Auto Repair and noticed a "for sale" sign in the window. On impulse, she pulled in. The shop was empty, but Marcus's number was on the sign. When she called, he explained he was retiring, moving to be closer to his son in Arizona. "Getting too old for the work," he said with a laugh. "Time to let someone else take over." Sarah asked the price. She asked about financing. She asked if he'd be willing to sell to someone who knew absolutely nothing about cars but everything about second chances. 3 months later, after business loans and consultations and a crash course in auto repair from Marcus himself, she became the owner of Webb's Auto Repair. She kept the name, kept the Christmas tree in the corner, and added a new policy. Every Christmas Eve, one family in need would get free repairs, no questions asked. The first year, she helped a young father whose transmission had failed on his way to see his newborn daughter. The second year, it was an elderly couple trying to reach their granddaughter's wedding. Each time, she explained about Marcus, about Christmas Eve 7 years ago, about how kindness doesn't end when the moment passes but ripples outward in ways we can't predict or control. Marcus visited once before he moved, ostensibly to make sure she was managing the equipment properly. But really, Sarah suspected, to see what his old shop had become. When he saw the families she'd helped, the photos she'd hung on the wall documenting each Christmas Eve rescue, his eyes grew bright with tears. "You did good," he said simply. "Better than good. You understood." What Sarah understood was this: we're all one disaster away from being stranded on a dark highway. We're all carrying losses we can't articulate and fears we can't name. But we're also capable of extraordinary grace, of choosing in our darkest moments to be light for someone else. Marcus had fixed her car that Christmas Eve, but what he'd really fixed was something deeper. Her faith in humanity. Her understanding of what it meant to be part of a community. Her belief that even in our brokenness, we can be instruments of healing for others. Every Christmas Eve now, when Sarah stays late at the shop waiting for someone who needs help, she thinks about that snowy night, about Emma asleep on the couch, about a stranger who asked for nothing in return. She thinks about how one act of kindness didn't just change that night. It changed everything that came after. And isn't that the real miracle of the season? Not the grand gestures or the dramatic rescues, but the quiet decision to see someone else's suffering and do something about it. To be, for just one moment, the answer to someone's desperate prayer. The snow falls again this year, thick and relentless, and somewhere on a dark highway, someone is afraid. But tonight, Sarah is ready. Tonight, someone else will discover that even in the coldest darkness, there are still people who stop, who help, who refuse to let strangers remain alone in their fear. Because Marcus taught her that this is how humanity survives, one small act of grace at a time, echoing forward into the endless winter, reminding us all that we're never as alone as we think.